No matter how you cut it, theft is theft. Inflation is theft, no matter how concealed or stealthy people say it is. By the way, inflation isn't hidden, nor is it covert. The inflationary results of the Federal Reserve's and federal government's dollar devaluation are highly apparent every time you go shopping. And no, this isn't just the way it is. If you say such nonsense, you expose your total lack of historical and economic understanding. Unbacked paper money is not natural, spontaneous, free market money. Historically, gold and silver are these things. And central banking, like the Federal Reserve, isn't necessary nor in accordance with a genuinely free market economy. Again, if you think this way, you're exposing your historical and economic ignorance. This country spent the vast majority of its first half without a central bank like the Federal Reserve, and we did just fine without it. In fact, we became a global economic superpower without a central bank, and we did it with gold as our money. But the government wants you brainwashed into believing that their central bank and unbacked paper money is the only way to have a currency. And why? Well, it's simple. Under this arrangement, they get to keep robbing you by printing all the money they need to cover their debt in big government schemes like warfare and welfare statism. And you're forced to sit there and accept it because of their legal tender laws. The reason your artificially valued and propped up little green presidential portraits have any value whatsoever is because you're technically forced to transact in those pieces of paper via the government's legal tender laws. Without legal tender, the government knows you wouldn't use their green presidential portraits for anything other than lighting fires, blowing your nose, or perhaps as bathroom tissue. And that's why it's called fiat, by the way. Your unbacked government paper money is merely valuable for commercial transactions because the government declared it so via legal fiat or directive. And shame on all of you who brush this issue aside by saying, well, just learn to invest. Why don't you just trade stocks to beat inflation? Problem solved. Sure, that's a practical solution to dealing with dollar devaluation, and you have every right to do it. But that doesn't change the fact that your government is still systematically stealing from your hard-earned dollars' purchasing power every time it runs the printing press. A crime is still a crime, regardless of the measures you take to protect yourself. And crimes, in principle, still need to be addressed and dealt with if we're to have a civilized society. If there was a bad murder or property theft problem in your neighborhood, sure, you can buy security systems, cameras, locks, and firearms. But does that mean the thieves and murderers shouldn't still be brought to justice? Or that people shouldn't address the problem if it's a collective issue? Keep in mind, absent a central bank and a fiat currency, you'd still be able to invest in companies and speculate all you want. That's the free market for you, after all. But the difference is this: under a genuine free market, it would be purely an unforced choice for you to risk your money investing in companies and speculating. Under today's non-market statist conditions, millions are uncomfortably forced into stock speculation, or else the government will just steal the purchasing power of their money through inflation. The way it used to be, prior to the Federal Reserve in total fiat currency, people were perfectly free to invest, but they didn't have to. In fact, they could get ahead by simply saving their money, since their money was gold, and gold generally rises in value thanks to its scarcity. And that's how freedom and free market capitalism are supposed to actually work. The money you make is genuinely yours, and you can sit on it and spend it whenever and however you'd like. Just like robbers aren't allowed to break into your home and regularly steal 2, 3, 4, 8, or 20% of your wealth each year, the government doesn't have the right to do this neither. That's why a critical mass of Americans need to rapidly wake up and recognize inflation for the theft that it really is. That's why I don't even like the Federal Reserve's nonsensical 2% annual inflation target, because no one has the right to freely steal $2 out of my $100 and leave me with $98. And then when I complain, they turn around and say, well, it's quote unquote monetary policy. Let me steal from you. It's only 2%. Obviously, this is absurd to the highest degree. And it gets more absurd the higher up you go in denominations. I mean, if the Federal Reserve's money printing causes 2% inflation in a year where you made $100,000, that's still $2,000. Again, what allows these unelected, shadowy crooks at the Federal Reserve to get away with this? Under a genuinely free market economy, which we used to be very close to having, gold money was spontaneously valued and naturally managed via supply and demand, like any other commodity in the economy. And you didn't need government oversight or micromanaging because gold is universally valuable to people regardless of where they are or what their own individual government's decrees and policies are. This kept banks more honest back then as well, because without the government having a quote-unquote lender of last resort central banking mechanism, banks couldn't irresponsibly and endlessly lend money since they were limited by the physical gold within their vaults. So banks had to operate and compete like any other business in the free market. Their solvency, responsibility, and reputation were especially valued and jealously guarded, or else they knew they'd lose customers. So hopefully by now the principle is clear. If you're pro-individual liberty and freedom, and you don't want the government stealing from people, you have to want a separation of banking and state. Again, this isn't some egg-headed theoretical pipe dream. America spent much of its history without a central bank like the Federal Reserve, and we did it with commodity currency like the gold standard. As I referenced in episode 2, while covering Professor Joseph Salerno's article about deflation phobia, during the 19th century, absent central banking and unbacked paper money, we had natural deflation coupled with unprecedented wealth. This is all relevant to today's world where, quote unquote, affordability is a hot button issue. If more Americans understood fiat money, central banking, and how both of these things conspire to relentlessly create inflation, they know where to best focus their collective anger. But unfortunately, since too few understand all of this, too many people turn to economically illiterate ideas like socialism and communism to try bringing prices down. Conversely, those who claim to defend ideas like limited government, individual liberty, and free markets reliably whiff and fold on the central banking and inflation issues. Sure, you can bring down prices with supply-side policies like tax cuts and deregulation, and all of that is good. But as I covered in episode 2, all natural marketplace deflation that's brought about by increased productivity by firms in the private sector will eventually get wiped out by the Federal Reserve's ceaseless dollar devaluation and resulting inflation. And this gets exacerbated when the supposedly pro-limited government party continues raising the national debt, which further incentivizes more money printing. And to close out, do not give in to pessimism, thinking that there's no way to overturn our current corrupt monetary and banking situation. This wickedness has been overturned before. Both Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson ended the central banking systems of their time. Furthermore, President John Tyler twice vetoed attempts to reestablish central banking during his presidency. Also, when it comes to keeping the government's money, which is just our own money, by the way, separate from banking institutions, both Martin Van Buren and James Polk championed an independent treasury system. So what's been done before can be done again, but it requires a leader in political movement that's educated in these matters and principled in their drive to restore a truly free market, where money and banking are purely handled in the private sector, thus truly and meaningfully returning power to the people. And I don't mean the people in the phony and monstrous way the socialists and communists do, which they just mean mob rule. No. I mean the people in the pro-liberty, Jeffersonian, and Jacksonian sense, where the productive working people of this country can work as hard as they want to make money without having their money's value stolen by central bank inflation.